Certainly, this very important topic would require maybe a little bit more of time and a better psychological environment, and not at 10 o'clock by night when everybody is tired and the hemicycle is not very full. But it's not me, neither you, it's the political groups who decided to discuss at 10 o'clock such an important issue. We are not going to exhaust it. We'll have to come back to it. And I want to thank Ms. Baumann and all of the members who have actually contributed to this report on EU-China relations. China will mark this century, for sure. I'm just coming back from China, by the way. I was there 5 days ago. I came back last Saturday. I attended the EU-China summit. It's the first time that it takes place in person since 2019. And talking to China face to face at the highest level was a good experience and essential in order to have a constructive and stable relations and to understand better where we are, which are our positions. So I was very happy to have this opportunity. I've been there before, 1 month before, to prepare the strategic dialogue, which is part of our summit. What can I say? Well, the least I can say is that our relations are broad and complex, and how do we manage it will be crucial for us, crucial for China, and even for the world, given the importance of our relations and the global challenges that we must face together. No way to try to solve the climate issue without a strong engagement from China, because China is burning today more coal than the rest of the world together. And 90% of the new coal plants in the whole world are being built in China. So if you want to solve the climate issue, count on China. Otherwise you will not be able. This is one aspect of our complex relationship. And once again, we repeated this famous triptych, being partner, competitor, and rivals, that China doesn't like a lot because they claim that they are not rivals. They are just partners and maybe competitors, but certainly not rivals. And every time I talk with my Chinese friends, I spend quite a long time trying to explain what do we mean to be a rival. And then I use the example that the Real Madrid and Barcelona, they are rivals when they play football. And because being rival means that they have different goals and each one wants to win. But maybe in Chinese, the word rival has a different connotation than in English. Maybe rival in Chinese is a stronger assessment. It looks more like being an enemy than being just someone who is competing systematically, you know. In any case, we discuss a lot about what does it mean to be rival, and I wanted to convince our partners that we can be partners and rival at the same time. That there is not contradiction, because one thing is to be a systemic rival, because our systems are rival, and another thing is to be in a systematic rivalry. Une chose c'est être des rivaux systémiques, une chose c'est être dans une permanente et systémique rivalité.
It's one thing to be.
We are not confronting every day on everything. By the contrary, in some things we have to cooperate. In others we have to compete. But to compete, we compete also with the US. Competition is with everybody in the world. Economic competition at least. Another thing is political competition. But we are rivals because our values and visions are different on key subjects, on democracy and on the universal character of human rights. These two things are important enough to justify rivalry. We are rivals because we have different political systems, including the way people are electing their people who rules the governments, and we are considering human rights differently. At the same time, you must work with China because today global challenges, I said, cannot be solved without China. And our economic ties and common political responsibilities are too big. So we have to manage our relations constructively. For example, on the trade relationship, it's critically unbalanced. But this imbalance has been growing 20 years. In 20 years, it has been growing in the last 20 years. In 20 years, has been increasing 10 times. But in the last 2 years, has doubled. In the last 2 years, has doubled. So it has been a strong acceleration of the imbalance. The imbalance was a trend, a logical trend, because China is exporting more and more high value-added products, and it makes the trade deficit increase. But in the last 2 years has doubled. And when something doubles in a couple of years, wow, something's happened. Because if it is an accident, if it is just the consequences of the rebalancing of the world economy after the pandemic, well, but if it is structural and it is going to double in the next 2 years, then we have a problem. And that's what we talked with the Chinese. Is that the result of a fair competition, or it is the result of the market access, which is being obstructed and hampered by regulations? This was an interesting discussion. What does it mean overcapacity? Overcapacity over what? We also have overcapacity. If we consider that in some sectors we produce more than what we consume. Overcapacity means that you have a capacity to produce more of what you need to consume and you export. Then it's true, we have also overcapacity. But when you count the capacity of the Chinese economy to produce cars, and you see that they are able to produce 50 million cars a year, this is an extraordinary capacity, much bigger than the internal consumption. It's about 20, 30 million cars that can be exported in a year basis. So everything is relative, and we have to discuss what does it mean, the words, in practical terms, taking into account international trade rules. We asked China to act to address the root causes of this trade deficit, which has reached the astronomical figure of 400 billion euros a year, and is not sustainable. So either they open more the economy, or we will have to close our. It's one thing or the other. Either they open more, either we will have to protect ourselves, which means closing. Then there are many other demands about, for example, clarifying cross-border data flow, to open procurement markets, including medical devices, abandoning preferential treatment of Chinese firms, to take action on regionalization of food products, a lot of issues that needs to be mended. But your report on China is much extent than just about economics, trade and deficits. You put forward recommendations in 3 areas: human rights, European open strategic autonomy, and engagement in global challenges. Human rights. This is the area where our systemic rivalry is most pronounced, based on how do we consider and implement international law, We continue calling on China about the respect to human rights and to guarantee all human rights being equal and not selective. We raise serious concerns on human rights situations in Xinjiang, in Tibet and Hong Kong, and the treatment of human rights defenders across China, mentioning some very concrete and specific cases. And we will continue doing so. Then on strategic autonomy, there comes the debate about the risking and decoupling. I try to explain them, and it's important that we consider that de-risking is not an anti-China plot. De-risking is not something that we use as a fight banner, a combat banner. It's as common sense. They are practicing de-risking. We invented the word, they invented the matter. And they started de-risking much before us. They started diversification. And I mentioned some sentences from President Xi himself when he was talking about a circular economy and the need to be self-sufficient, which is about de-risking. De-risking means to avoid over-dependencies that can become critical vulnerabilities. Like we discovered when the pandemic came and we realized that in Europe we were not producing a single gram of paracetamol. Or when Russia invaded Ukraine, and then we discovered that we were depending 40% of our Russian gas. Two strong dependencies can become vulnerabilities. And it is indispensable for us to ensure our security. This was also an important discussion because it's a matter of you don't trust me, I trust you, but there is always a but when we talk about economic dependencies. Because yes, the market will provide unless there is a big crisis, and then the market doesn't provide. That's what's happening with paracetamol during the pandemic. We discussed about security, the war of aggression against Ukraine. We expect China to use its influence on Russia to stop this war, to convince Putin that he has made a big mistake with this war. They say that they have an unlimited friendship. Well, in practical terms, it's more limited than unlimited, because they ensure us that they are not part of this military alliance. They are not in a military alliance with Russia to fight in this war, and they are not supporting direct or indirect military support to Russia. But we continue pressing China to make clear that this is a war of aggression and using its influence on the aggressor to stop this war. With regard to Taiwan, our one-China policy remains unchanged. We are opposed to any attempt to change the status quo unilaterally, by force, by coercion or intimidations. And that tension should be resolved through meaningful dialogue. The same is true for the South China Sea, and we call all parties to resolve disputes through peaceful means in accordance with international law. And lastly, on global challenges, I insisted at the beginning there is not alternative to work with China. China is at the same time the most important investor on renewables, is a champion of renewables, and at the same time is a champion on coal. Both things are true. They are developing renewables at the stronger pace in the world, and they are doing the same thing with coal. And we have to tell them that it's a problem. And then the discussion comes about climate change. Who produced the problem? It's true that today we are not, because we produce only 8% of the world emissions, but if we have a look at the accumulated amount of emissions, it's a different story. In any case, they are, by their own interest, because they have a strong pollution problem, that they have to reduce emissions. And it's important that in global health, debt restructuring, they play an important role that they will have to play. If they don't do, if tomorrow there is a debt crisis and there is a big restructuring of the developing countries' debt, China is the greatest creditor, the biggest creditor in the world today, not being a member of the Paris Club, is China. The biggest bank of the developing world is no longer the West, it's China. And it's important that our ability to work with China on these global challenges, because it will define the 21st century, for sure. So this report is a very important one. I think that the Parliament has to look for another occasion to continue discussing on it, because I don't think that tonight we are going to exhaust the issue. I think the Parliament will close the doors, the lights, before we finish discussing about China. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borrell.
Yep, the discussion on China will go on. No? Yep.